Join me on an inspiring journey through the world of fitness, health, and performance with the Genetic Coach, where I delve deep into the genetic foundations of athletic endurance, discovering how genetics is revolutionizing our understanding of human potential and how we can unlock our full athletic capabilities through a fresh perspective on conventional practices. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Genetic Coach. We've spoken a lot about looking after our bodies in terms of exercise and sporting performance, but what about our brains? And more particularly, what happens when our brains get injured? And that's exactly what today's topic is all about, traumatic brain injury. And for those that haven't experienced traumatic brain injury, one could easily think that it's simply a hit to the head, having a scan, and then maybe a few weeks of recovery. But for many people, TBI is a before and after, with symptoms that don't show up on the outside. So things like fatigue that flattens you, perhaps emotions that don't behave, maybe memory gaps, sensory overload, and a brain that just can't do what it used to do on command. So today, my guest is Natalie Gauger, and she is going to help us understand what traumatic brain injury is all about because she has experienced it firsthand. And she's going to talk us through the real impact of traumatic brain injury, what recovery involves, and why the future of treatment might be more personalized than what we think, including the role of genetics in reducing trial and error. So I'm very pleased to welcome Natalie. And Natalie, please won't you give us an introduction to yourself?
Thanks, Di. My name's Natalie Gauger. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I do love genetics. I love 3x4. It's just a fabulous test. In undergrad, got my degree in biology with a specialization in genetics and molecular bio. And then I went on to get my master's in clinical nutrition from Sonoran University Health Sciences, where I really dove into the more integrative functional side of things. I went back to school because I love nutrigenomics so much. And then I went on to become a certified nutrition specialist, where I do see some clients on the side and enjoy seeing clients, supporting them nutrition, diet, lifestyle supplement recommendations. So I think it's just really powerful. And that's really my mission in life, is just to, allow and provide information on genetics and how it can improve lots of different conditions, whether it's, concussions or, GI, hormones. Pretty much every single specialty genetics can help to support and give more personalized recommendations for, diet, lifestyle, and supplements.
Okay, brilliant. So you are the perfect person to talk us through real life experience of concussion and how it impacted you and what we can start looking at in terms of treatment protocols. But before we go any further, I just really want to note that this episode is for education purposes only. It's not medical advice. And if you are dealing with, concussion symptoms, we really do advise that you please talk to a qualified clinician. Okay, so Natalie, I'm going to give the floor over to you and let you tell us your story.
Thank you. So I'll take you back. I'm 31 now, but this happened when I was 17. I was in high school. I played softball. I was on a travel team, and I played for our high school as well. So it was during one of our high school games. I was at first base, and I usually didn't play this position. I was usually in the outfield. So I think the reason this happened is because I was not comfortable in the position that I was in. And so I was at first base, and I had lost the ball in the sun. It was coming from the third baseman. She picked it up, thrown it to first base as she should. I lost it in the sun. I remember putting my glove up to catch it, but it never came. And then the ball came in and hit me right kind of on the temple on the left side of my head.
Wow.
And that's pretty much the last thing I remember until I was I was in the hospital that night. So it was horrifying as a young kid, to have that experience. But I'm thankful, my parents were at the game, the coach, everybody apparently ran out, and the trainer had talked to me, and I didn't go in an ambulance or anything. My parents had taken me to the hospital because they wanted to take me to the hospital. Then they did, CT scan, looked at everything. They did say that there's definitely inflammation, but I did get to go home that night, which was, very thankful that it wasn't more severe, especially because, I feel that it still was a severe concussion because of the experience that I've had since. And so that happened, I think it was like the end of my third quarter of high school. And I really didn't go back to school the rest of that quarter. There was struggles with the school because I was in the IB program, and because I wasn't going to school, they were like, she needs to take her exams, her final exams and her IB exams. The school is kind of fighting with my family and our doctors, and the doctors were like, no, she shouldn't be taking these exams. She's not doing well. I was fatigued. I was still having severe headaches. It was hard to watch TV. I could still kind of talk with friends and stuff for, a short period of time, or my family, but that was really all that I had capacity for, because I never knew when I was not going to feel good, or, when things were going to, change, or I wanted to go to sleep, whatever it may be. And so that was really hard that year, because also, it's junior year, everybody's having fun, everybody's, preparing for college, but I'm not feeling good. And so it was a really, really hard experience to go through. But it did take me about a year to recover from, the more severe symptoms that I was having, like the fatigue, the headaches started to get less severe, more manageable. In the fall of senior year, I did go back to school, but my grades had completely changed from the pre-concussion. And Dee, I love that you said, there's a pre-concussion and then a post-concussion kind of life, because there really is. It completely changes the way your brain is working, how you feel. And so my post-concussion or my pre-concussion grades, I was getting A's, B's, as a fine student, maybe a C here and there. But then after the concussion, I was really, really struggling in school. Some classes I was failing. I was having a hard time paying attention. I was more tired. I was just trying to figure it out. And I was lucky enough to have good enough grades before the concussion to still get into college and go to college. But even in college, I continued to struggle with my grades, my attention, and just my ability to organize my time. And just it changed the way I approached a lot of things in life. So when I was a junior, I had taken Organic 1, and then the professor from my Organic 1 class, he was like, you're attending every single class. You come to office hours. I can see that you're trying, you're failing my class. There's something going on here that's not out of your control. And I never really thought of going back to the doctor post-concussion, because a lot of the severe symptoms had kind of, subsided. And so I did go back and I got ADHD tested. They did a few other tests too. I can't remember what those were, but they did diagnose me with ADHD, and they put me on medication. And after the medication, it completely changed the way my brain worked. And I'm still on medication now. I tried to get off of it twice, but the truth is my brain chemistry is just different, and that I need that additional support. But after I got on the medication and I was in his class for Organic 2, I got an A in Organic 2, and everything just clicked. I wasn't having to study as hard. I wasn't in the library, 24/7, just trying to pass. I wasn't stressed about it. I was like, no, I've got this. I feel like I can totally manage my grades and my life and balancing, all of my activities. So it was really refreshing to have that like aha moment of like, we're out on the other side. We're still post concussion because there's still things that, may happen or like, uh, attention stuff like that. But it's really been a journey. But I'm just really, really thankful that, there is recommendations that you can provide for somebody. And I did forget to mention, I am doing like supplements and stuff like that on top of the medication, but sometimes you have to have, some people just need both, where some people just need supplements. And, it's something that I've had to struggle with and accept because being in the functional integrative world, you don't want to be on medication.
Yeah.
So, so that's my story. That's my story.
Okay. So, I mean, it's very clear from that story, the before and after picture that we've spoken about. And I mean, this did happen quite a number of years ago. So obviously there have been advances in medical technologies and just thought processes and protocols, medical protocols around dealing with many of, these medical situations. But if you could think back in terms of the type of support and information that you were given back then as a teenager, in terms of just understanding the condition, were you given much information about what had actually happened to you and what you could potentially expect from it, and how to go about your recovery? And then just compare that to maybe what's happening now, with athletes that are potentially experiencing concussions.
Yeah, no, there was not much information at all. My family and I felt totally lost and remind you, this was, I can't even believe it, like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
That this happened, but it's just amazing how much everything has grown since and how much knowledge and support individuals with concussions have. But I really didn't have much. So after I'd gone to the hospital that initial night, I followed up with a doctor in our town, but then he had referred me to Children's Hospital to see someone there in Washington, D.C. And so I really was getting like the top care I feel that I possibly could have, and seeing like really great doctors. They were doing tests and, computer tests and stuff on me. I remember doing that during that process, but they never really like sat down and talked to me about like how this was going to change the way, my future was, or, any interventions really that I could have done in the moment. It was really just like, how are you feeling today? And there wasn't much information. I think one time they did talk to my parents about putting me on depression medication, because they thought that could help in some way. And I don't remember the mechanism behind why that may have helped at the time. But they did discuss that with my parents. And so, yeah, so that's really it. That's really all that was provided at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, we know now that I think there's a much greater focus on, concussion, and it's maybe longer term implication. I think we understand it more now. And maybe you can just chat us through around what, if this has happened to you now, like what interventions could be in place and what type of things could we look at in terms of promoting a better recovery profile, not just for immediately, but for longer term?
So I think the first thing that has really come into play is the new genetic information, not, looking at is somebody at true risk, but we're looking at how variations are impacting your unique biochemistry, where traumatic brain injuries are, the severity or, those implications afterwards, they're different for each person. So when you know someone's genetics, you're able to then identify what pathways and what, pieces of the puzzle someone needs to focus on more than other people. That way, all of the recommendations are personalized to that individual that had the concussion, because there's so many things. There's, inflammation itself. Obviously, we know inflammation's occurring with concussions. It could be, also a histamine response. It could be, gut health kind of tied in there. And I've seen that, looking at my genetics and kind of looking back saying, these are things that I could have done, as well as, the mood and behavior pathway, looking at neurotransmitters, looking at, BDNF. There's a lot of genes and pathways, biological processes that are super important to support, especially after concussion. And I think that the more and more research comes out, the more that we're using genetics to optimize and personalize those recommendations, I can't even imagine what things are going to look like in 10 years from now. It's going to be amazing, because now we have all of these tools, and even with Amen clinics as well, doing the brain scans after concussions on the more professional athletes. And even, the everyday person that has a TBI can also go and try to get care from one of their clinics. I think that we're really changing the world, the concussion world, the TBI world, with all of this personalized care, and it's just going to get even better.
Yeah, so it's all about personalization. So you've got, I guess there are current protocols that are generalized and that are applied to everyone who's in this boat. And then we've got the personalization coming largely from the genetic side of things. But let's just do a comparison. So maybe if we could use you as a case study almost, and just say, what were the sort of the generalized recovery protocols that you went through when you had your injury versus what you know now with your genetics and what you would start putting into play?
Yes, definitely. So when back then during the concussion, I would say they, Advil, continuously, just keep taking Advil or ibuprofen, just continue to do that. And as we know in the functional world, as you continue to take those, that may decrease your stomach acid. And so didn't know about that back then. So that's one of the things that they had me do, as I said before, like they told my parents, they would talk to my parents about the depression medication, and really just, rest, sleep, low screens, try to turn off the lights, just, really try to focus on rest and recovery. And those were pretty much the only recommendations that they had given me. No, they never talked about nutrition. They never talked about, they never asked me what I was eating. They never talked about, potential supplementation. And what's interesting too is because we didn't live in DC, we lived outside of DC. So when we would drive in, there was this show, I forget what it was called, but it was a cupcake show. And so we would go to the cupcake store every single time I would go to the doctor, and we would get cupcakes and I would eat them. And then I would, my mom bought me the recipe book, and we would actually occasionally make the cupcakes like once a week, just for something for me to do in the house that was, not a screen. Yeah. And then I would eat the cupcakes. So that's the more traditional side of things. They never asked me what I was eating. And if they would have asked me, maybe I wouldn't have been eating cupcakes all the time. And then on the integrative side, with what we know now, there's literally so much that we could have done with my genetics, and the cupcakes is like the worst thing that I could have possibly done. I have a high impact pathway for inflammation, which means, I'm just, I have a trigger that's going to increase my inflammation more easily than the typical person. Yeah. And then I have a high histamine pathway. So, that inflammation, when there's more inflammation, then it's going to trigger more histamine. I also naturally eat a pretty high histamine diet. Like I love fish, shrimp, avocados. Those are like my favorite foods. Okay. So that also wasn't helping. And then my mood and behavior pathway is only medium, but there are some SNPs in there that impact that I could have optimized and, helped, that would have helped with the concussion. And then also, so there's no gut health pathway within the 3x4 report, but there are 4 SNPs specifically that look more at gut inflammation. And I have variations, and I think I'm homozygous for every single of those variations. So my gut is more inflamed. So like that cascade in itself with, with a concussion, my brain is inflamed, but then also that's the gut brain axis that's going to affect my gut. I was not supporting my gut at all. And as a child, I wasn't eating many vegetables. I think, my favorite foods, as I said, like fish, avocado. I loved sour cream. I loved cream cheese, lots of like burgers. My family wasn't very like chicken wings. We had a fryer in the house. Like not a good environment for my genetics and to optimize my own recovery.
Yeah.
And so there's so much that I could have done just there with those, but there's so many other integrated functional protocols now. Like when I was in school, my master's program, there was a CNS that specifically specializes in concussion. And she talked about a protocol, and I thought it was so amazing what she's doing with these people. But, focusing on these anti-inflammatory foods is really important, supporting the gut, as well as supplements. I know creatine was one that was on her list, but it's just really amazing the advances that we've had that we can help to support someone, like in addition to what the doctors can support them. And so genetics just guides you and tells you exactly what you need to do, because like my inflammation's high, but my oxidative stress is very high. So I also need to focus on that too, because if I have high oxidative stress, if I'm not supporting that pathway, that's going to drive inflammation more.
Yeah.
So it's so amazing what personalizing the recommendations can do for someone, because there's so many avenues and biological processes that you can support with someone with concussions.
And I think a lot of the interventions are quite simple. It doesn't mean making major changes that now your whole life is going to change. It's just being more sensitive to the type of choices you're making on a daily basis. So maybe how did your diet change, and what are the little things that you started doing differently to support yourself better?
Yes, definitely. So focusing on, inflammation has been something ever since I got my genetic results. That has been something that I've really worked on, and I can even see it in my body and my face. Like I haven't lost any weight, but like it feels different. I'm not puffy. That's something that's really like I have noticed a physical change. So, increasing omega-3s in my diet. So, nuts, seeds, as well as, I was already eating that fish, but I'm just like upping my omegas, trying to make sure that I'm choosing restaurants that are using, better oils than others. That's something that I've been more mindful of if I am going out. Eating more vegetables. And then with the histamine, I have started, trying to eat more histamine degrading foods, like dill and a lot of those. So I'll make like a green goddess dressing to put on stuff, just because I don't want to give up my histamine foods, and no one should have to. So you have to just, add things in to support the breakdown of histamine, unless you're having like super severe symptoms, so really just including those, histamine degrading foods, trying to eat those. I feel like a huge difference when I do that. So doing that as well. SPMs also, I notice when I take an SPM, it really, the pro-inflammatory mediator, it really helps reduce my inflammation. And so that's something that can also be used more acutely, but occasionally if I'm feeling just inflamed, I'll use that, and that's helped. But really just focusing on, those anti-inflammatory foods, anti-inflammatory supplements. Like I'll also do omega-3 supplement, SPM occasionally. That's been super helpful. And then also just cooking more and more with spices. Like I used to kind of be scared of spices. I don't know why. But it's a little intimidating, you know?
If you don't know how to combine them all, because you could make a real mess of what you're trying to cook.
I know, like it's intimidating to start to learn to use spices, but now I use a lot of spices, and I feel like that also helps with my inflammation and just, you know, making sure my histamine isn't being impacted.
So, you spoke a little bit about gut health as well. Is there anything specific that you are doing for that?
Yes. So it's very interesting because in supervision and when I see clients, you know, if somebody's having gut health concerns or they want to support their gut, fermented foods and probiotics are something that always come up, and yogurt, you know, these are foods that naturally you can support your microbiome. But when you have someone that has an increased, you know, their histamine pathways impacted, and then they're also inflamed, and then I also have other symptoms where histamine may, you know, I may have that histamine overload. You know, that's not a recommendation that I would want to give someone. And I was eating yogurt a lot, especially, you know, as I started, you know, my schooling, and I hadn't had my genetic results yet, but that's something that I don't eat as often, if at all. I'll try to kind of avoid pickled foods, fermented foods, yogurt as well, just because I do notice that I do get a little more inflamed from those foods, but it's really something that's going to support your gut. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but without doing your genetics, you truly won't know if that's something that's going to actually support you, or if it's something that is going to, you know, maybe working against you.
Exactly. Wow. So there's a fair bit to consider, but I think, you know, working with a practitioner obviously makes it a lot more simple. And they are able to really guide you into what are the top sort of interventions that you could make, that are going to make the biggest difference for you. But if we think about nutrition, supplements, and then lifestyle, is there anything on the lifestyle side that you have maybe cut out or incorporated that has made a difference for you? And what about stress? I mean, surely that, you know, impacts your inflammation, and I think also obviously histamine response. And is there anything specific that you do to manage your stress levels?
Yes, that's definitely something that's super important for people with concussions, especially because it's a very stressful time for someone. Because you're not sure, you know, you're scared, you've gone through this experience, you don't know what the future is going to look like. And so that is a very, very big concern. So something that I've done is I go every Tuesday night to the stretch class, and they do a sound bath while they do it. And so it's just very relaxing, and it's almost like my reset for the week. And so finding something that you like, don't do anything that you don't like, but try things so that you can find that thing that helps you to relax. But that's something that I do. I also I like to walk as well. And it's really nice to just leave your phone and decompress during the walk. And that's also something that I love, as well as, you know, deep breathing, box breathing. I do that a lot, like multiple times a day. And it's a tool that's super easy because you can be anywhere and just do it.
What is box breathing? Tell us what that is.
I love box breathing. Okay, so you will breathe in for, and I don't know if the seconds is correct, like truly correct for box breathing, but I do 5 seconds. So I'll breathe in for 5 seconds. You hold it for 5 seconds. You release your breath for 5 seconds, and then hold that again for 5 seconds. And just kind of do it. I don't actually time myself, but I maybe do it for like a minute or two, until I just feel better. But it helps with, you know, just decompression. I think it also stimulates your vagus nerve. It's just so calming and relaxing, and it just kind of resets yourself. So you could be at the computer, you could be driving, you could be in the middle of a stressful situation at work, or, you know, something, and just, you know, have that moment to yourself and just do that box breathing.
Fabulous. So, what I want to get onto now is just, we are running out of time a little bit, but just, your recommendations for somebody that is going through, or, has had a concussion, and maybe is really struggling in their recovery process. What are your thoughts and recommendations of what to do next?
Yeah. My recommendation would definitely be, if you haven't had a nutrigenomics test done, 1,000% get a nutrigenomics test and get a practitioner that is certified to review the test with you, to go over that report, because you want to understand how the concussion has impacted your unique biochemistry, and go ahead and start those personalized recommendations for you. So that would be like my number one thing that I would do if, I was starting from scratch now with the knowledge that I know. I would say that's the first thing that I would do. That way you can know exactly where you need additional support. And then go ahead and start those supplement recommendations, change your diet around, just swap things, add things into your diet. Because we never want to fully remove anything, but you can add so much into your diet that's going to support you, so you can still continue to eat the foods that you love. And so, yeah, I think that those are the things that I would do first if I was, and if I did have the means too, I would probably go to AMA clinics and get one of those brain scans that looks at how, your brain chemistry is working, and, you can identify, areas where you can provide additional support as well. So a combination between that more traditional care of, scanning, advanced scanning, imaging, that MD support, as well as, meeting with like a certified nutrition specialist, RD, health coach to review and give recommendations based upon your genetics. So those are the two things that I would do.
Yeah. And really just approaching it from a collaborative point of view, I guess. So we're not saying forget about the medical stuff and do the genetics. Not at all. We're saying a good combination, and really just looking at the person holistically, and giving them, a full spectrum, solution, I guess, at the end of the day. But I think also just giving yourself the grace to say that if you're not feeling better within 3 weeks, that's okay. This often is a long-term journey, like as you've painted. And I think just being gentle with yourself in understanding that it is a process, and not to expect that things will go back to exactly what they were pre-injury. And I mean, maybe that's just a quick question. How have you just like mentally, emotionally accepted the fact now that I'm different to what I was pre-injury?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been a journey, honestly, because as you go through it and you're struggling to get back to that place, I think just acceptance of just saying, like, I'll never have the same brain that I used to. And also just being very grateful that things aren't worse. And I think that's how I've come to accept my brain the way that it is now, is because, I'm just very, very grateful to, my memory is still intact. I can still learn. I was able to go to college and get my master's, and, still be able to, do everyday things, even though I do have some struggles. And I think it's just finding that peace and acceptance. And, I'm just grateful that things aren't worse than they are. And I know that there are people that had way more severe concussions than I did. And I think that's how I got to the fact and accepted it. Yeah.